Wanted for war crimes in Ukraine, a global arrest warrant is issued for Vladimir Putin. In a dramatic move, the International Criminal Court accused the Russian president of child abduction and other crimes against humanity, a move welcomed by Ukraine's President Zelensky.
Separating children from their families, depriving them of any opportunity to contact their relatives. All this is an obvious state policy of Russia, state decisions and state evil.
Moscow described the charge as outrageous and unacceptable. But what are the chances we'll ever see Mr. Putin in court? Also in News at 10 tonight. First, the teachers and now junior doctors say they will enter talks with the government to try to end their strikes. But other industrial disputes continue, including the passport agency, which could affect summer holidays. Nationwide strikes across the Channel have led to violent protests, piling more pressure on President Macron as he raises the retirement age for workers. Guilty of gross misconduct, but the police officer who repeatedly hit footballer Dalian Atkinson, who later died, is allowed to keep her job, leaving his family in dismay. And
what can I make with these ingredients? ?
There are many dishes you could make with those ingredients, such as an omelette, scrambled eggs, or grilled cheese.
How AI is helping blind and partial sighted people live their life freely.
This is ITV News at 10 with Rageh Omar.
Good evening. Russia's war in Ukraine has taken an unexpected and potentially far-reaching twist tonight. In an extraordinary development, Vladimir Putin now finds himself the subject of an arrest warrant by the International Criminal Court over allegations of war crimes in Ukraine. He's accused of ordering the unlawful deportation of thousands of children who've allegedly been abducted from their homes in occupied areas of Ukraine and taken to Russia. Kyiv tonight claimed 16,000 children have so far been forcibly taken away from their Ukrainian families. Moscow, which says it does not recognize the jurisdiction of the ICC, called the warrant legally void. It has previously claimed the Ukrainian children being removed to Russia were being taken to safety.
He's a president who yearns for a place in history. Tonight he has it, though in a way no head of state could envy. A fugitive from justice, a warrant issued for his arrest over the removal of thousands of Ukrainian children from their families.
It is forbidden by international law for occupying powers to transfer civilians from the territory they live in to other territories. Children enjoy special protection under the Geneva Convention.
The ICC holds President Putin and his Children's Commissioner personally responsible. They portray their work as humanitarian. The children, as orphans, rescued from the front line, offered a new life. But this little boy, Alexander, says Russian authorities forced him from his mother and told him he had a new family. He's since been reunited with his grandmother. But one group that helps bring children home says many are traumatized.
Some kids are not really understanding what's going on. They've been educated by Russian, books, including all the propaganda methods. Some of them been told by stories that there is no Ukraine anymore.
Ukraine claims more than 16,000 children are effectively held prisoner. They call it genocide by deportation.
Separating children from their families, depriving them of any opportunity to contact their relatives, hiding children on the territory of Russia, throwing them in the remote regions. All this is an obvious state policy of Russia, state decisions and state evil.
Russia's brutal assault has seen killings committed on a vast and well-documented scale. Investigations continue, but they do not, at least not yet, form part of the charge sheet. Tonight, the Kremlin dismissed the ICC's accusations. It does not recognize the court's jurisdiction.
It looks, for the time being, as though he may never be brought to justice. But it did look that way for Slobodan Milosevic and for other people in the history of global conflicts. So however confident he may feel at the moment, there may be just part of him that is a bit worried.
Putin may not end his days in jail, but the charges are a big moment, a signal that every effort will be made to hold to account the man who ordered the invasion. A warrant for the arrest of a serving head of state is not a step taken lightly. John Ray, News at 10.
So what is the institution that's taken this extraordinary step against the head of state, Russia's Vladimir Putin? The International Criminal Court in The Hague was created in 2002. It investigates and tries individuals charged with the gravest crimes, including genocide, war crimes and crimes against humanity. More than 120 countries are members and are party to the court. But crucially, that doesn't include Russia, China and the US, which are not members. Anyone who's convicted can be sentenced to jail for up to 30 years or life. Well, we can speak to Dan in Washington. As I was saying there, Dan, the US isn't a ratified member of the court because they are themselves worried that they could find themselves or their soldiers in a similar position. But the US has reacted to this move by the ICC tonight, hasn't it?
Yeah, they're in a slightly awkward position here, which might explain why there's been nothing on camera here today. But there was a very short statement put out this evening by the National Security Council spokesperson who said there's no doubt Russia is committing war crimes in Ukraine and we have been clear that those responsible must be held to account. You've heard that very angry reaction from Russia earlier on today, describing this as outrageous and unacceptable and pointing out that they are not signatories or haven't ratified the treaty which set up the ICC and therefore they don't have to enforce it. Well, the awkward situation for America is that, as you say, that they haven't ratified it either. And it does put President Biden in a difficult situation and exposes a bit of a kind of split within the different institutions here. On the one hand, the White House, the State Department and some intelligence agencies favour helping the ICC as much as they can, given that they haven't, they're not a signatory to that or ratified that treaty. On the other hand, the Pentagon is very concerned and even just last week refused to hand over intelligence to help investigations of Russian war crimes in Ukraine because they're worried about the implications for what US servicemen may have done in Iraq and Afghanistan. So it's a very difficult situation, but there's one thing that may be a takeaway from this is that President Putin himself, although he might not end up in a dock soon, he's going to have to be very careful about where he does travel. OK, Dan, in Washington, thanks very much indeed. Now, Britain's Foreign Secretary James Cleverly tonight welcomed the arrest warrant issued against Vladimir Putin. In a statement on social media, he said it is essential that those who carry out what he called horrific war crimes in Ukraine are brought to justice. Well, earlier today, he visited another of Russia's former Soviet neighbours, Georgia. With Russia to its north, Georgia is said to be very aware of what Britain calls Moscow's malign influence. In 2008, Russia invaded the Abkhazia and South Ossetia regions of Georgia for what it called peacekeeping reasons and has occupied them ever since.
If ever a country offered an early glimpse of Moscow's military adventurism, it is this one. Georgia knows all too well the impact of war with Russia. 15 years on, its land is still occupied by Russian troops, their base dominating the horizon. In 2008, this region endured Europe's first war of the 21st century, as Russian-backed separatists in the breakaway region of South Ossetia launched attacks on Georgian villages. It was a war that showed the first draft of Moscow's military playbook. How to counter it is the challenge for the Western alliance. The Foreign Secretary's tour of former Soviet nations is an attempt to align them more closely whilst offering support.
Show me where we are. Now we are here.
This is the so-called administrative borderline, where Georgia's control is wrested to Russia, where Russian troops still hold the ground.
What's the threat that you think Russia poses now to Georgia? What are the big issues?
Well, we're seeing that there is still this physical presence of Russian
troops in Georgia. But also what we're seeing is cyber attacks, disinformation, attempts to distort and influence the political environment here in Georgia.
But Georgia's own internal situation isn't straightforward. There is great sympathy for Ukraine and a home for many of its displaced. But a wish for closer links with the West is not shared by all in government. Just last week, the country saw rioting when a Russian-style law was proposed requiring media and non-governmental organisations receiving foreign funding to register as agents of foreign influence.
It was like a red line for us, to have this law in Georgia, and that's why we protested. Hundreds and thousands of Georgians, we protested against influence of Russia. In fact, it was like Russia's attempts to change the Georgian laws and Georgian culture and to introduce Russian-style laws in Georgia. But Georgians society answered with mass protests, and I think this protest will continue.
High above Tbilisi stands the Mother of Georgia statue. She welcomes friends with a bowl of wine and enemies with a sword. As with so many nations in this region, the war in Ukraine has hastened a reckoning here.
And Emma is now in the Kazakh capital, where the Foreign Secretary has this evening arrived. And news of these charges against President Putin, does it make these series of visits he's making to these, I suppose, so-called frontline states around Russia even more important?
I think the feeling within the team here is very much that this reinforces what they're trying to achieve, which is a broad coalition against Russia, against President Putin, and a team of different countries and organisations who are willing to stand up and say that somebody has to be held to account for what is going on in Ukraine. The Foreign Secretary welcomed the fact that the ICC had actually taken this move this evening because, in his words, he wants to see people who are accused of war crimes be held responsible. So there's no doubt that this reinforces the feeling that visiting countries, as we've been to this week, such as Moldova, Georgia and also now Kazakhstan, is a way to try and build that feeling of international coalition. There's support on one hand for countries like Moldova, who feel very much in the line of Russian ire, but also there is a feeling that they need to kind of keep on reinforcing these relations. It's important to say, though, that for every action there is a counter, and tonight Ukraine is facing a barrage of Shahed drone and missile attacks that are continuing into the night.
OK, Emma in the Kazakh capital, Astana. Thanks very much indeed. Well, here there's been another possible breakthrough in the wave of strikes that have disrupted crucial services across England. The Junior Doctors' Union, the BMA, tonight agreed to pay talks and a suspension of industrial action after a three-day strike this week that disrupted more than 175,000 appointments and operations. This follows yesterday's decision by health workers to suspend their industrial action while members vote on a new pay offer. Earlier today, the government and teachers' unions sat down for what are described as intensive talks. But several long-running disputes do remain unresolved, while passport office staff have announced a 5-week walkout.
What do we want now? It's been a winter of discontent, with nurses striking for the first time and ambulance workers walking out in pursuit of better pay. What do we want? Pay! This week it was junior doctors on the picket lines, and teachers again caused widespread disruption in England's schools. With that dispute, compromise is in the air. The teaching unions leaving the Department for Education after intensive talks today, with the promise of more tomorrow.
Remember, when we balance equations, what we do to one side, we need to do to the other.
Getting their sums right, all important for these secondary school pupils in southwest London. But the head teacher says he won't be able to balance the books if there's no extra money from the government to fund a pay rise.
If it is not funded, then we are in really big trouble. We could be looking at £400,000 extra that we need to find. And this year, we got some extra money, but for us was about £75,000. Now, I'm an English teacher, but even I can do the maths on that, and it doesn't work.
Will the government come up with the money? It's a question health leaders are also asking tonight as junior doctors agreed to suspend strikes and begin talks over their pay. The offer to nurses and other NHS staff for this year is worth between £1,600 and nearly £3,800, depending on their grade. Plus, they'll get another 5% for next year. Number 10 says the cost will be around £4 billion. So will those figures become the benchmark to settle other disputes?
We want to do the right thing by junior doctors, but we've also got to protect the wider equity and the financial reality and prevent inflation busting pay rises. I don't think the BMA's suggestion of a 35% pay rise is right, but there is a positive offer on the table. I hope they take it.
This economist says savings in hospitals or schools won't be enough to cover pay rises.
Ultimately, if we're going to be seeing bigger 5% plus pay awards across the public sector, it's very difficult to make that work without extra cash from the Treasury. And I think that will be one of the key decisions for either the next few months or at the very latest, the autumn statement.
But while some disputes are now being resolved, others are escalating. Today, a strike by passport officers announced to begin just in time for the Easter holidays. A summer of strife is still possible.
Well, Libby joins me now. Libby, so after agreement with health unions yesterday, more talks announced today for teachers and doctors. But this could end up being pretty costly for the government, couldn't it?
Yes, well, I think firstly it's important to say that there will be enormous relief around England tonight, I think, among parents and children, that the prospect of more strikes in schools may now be averted. But that said, it does look like these disputes are going to cost the government quite a lot in terms of cash. Now, there's been a lot of debate today as to whether the settlement for the health workers would be paid for centrally or whether, in fact, hospitals would have to make what's called efficiency savings. It's unclear at the moment quite how much will come from either the government or from hospitals themselves. I have to say that when one is thinking of costs, another really important figure tonight, the junior doctors strike this week, 3 days of strike action, that led to 175,000 appointments and operations being cancelled, with 7 million people on the NHS waiting list. I think the government has decided that that is a cost they simply can't afford.
OK, Libby in Westminster, thank you. Now, France has also been hit by a nationwide wave of industrial action, but there the strikes and protests have erupted into violence. Demonstrators took to the streets of several cities, including Paris, for a second night tonight. They're angry at President Macron's decision to use his executive powers to force through an unpopular law, which raises the retirement age from 62 to 64. The French capital is already clogged by mounds of uncollected rubbish as a result of a strike by refuse and sanitation workers.
The rain did nothing to dampen people's anger in Paris tonight. A stone's throw from the French National Assembly and in the shadow of the Eiffel Tower, protesters came with a message for their president: "We are here." It is the last resort for us after this law was forced through Parliament to come, protest and express ourselves spontaneously. This is the second night running. Thousands have turned up here to make their feelings clear. If they were hoping for a response from the president, they got one from the police.
Things turned really tense really quickly. The protesters keep letting fireworks off, and every time they do that, the police fire more tear gas.
They are angry because of a last-minute decision by President Macron's government to bypass Parliament and force through a bill raising France's retirement age from 62 to 64. The announcement made by the Prime Minister last night was met with outrage from opposition MPs. And protests up and down the country today. In the west, workers marched in Rennes, while others blockaded the port in the southern city of Marseille. In Dijon, they burned effigies of their president and his cabinet, while in Paris, the rubbish continues to rot. The bin collectors have been on strike here for 12 days.
I'm so fed up because it's now over a week that it goes on, and it's disgusting, and there are rats and, and it stinks, quite frankly. Ooh.
It stinks, it's ugly.
But you support the strikes?
Yes.
Nevertheless,
it's a shame. Really, it's a shame. I can understand there are a lot of problems, but not like this. Not like this.
You don't support them?
No, I don't support.
Whether or not these protesters have popular support, they're here to make it clear to their president that he does not have theirs. Chloe Keedy, News at 10, Paris.
Prince Harry today launched a legal battle to get the defence by the Mail on Sunday publisher thrown out over his libel claim. The Duke of Sussex was not present at the High Court for the proceedings. He's suing Associated Newspapers over an article about a separate claim he's making against the Home Office regarding security arrangements for himself and his family in the UK. After hearing today's evidence, the judge is to give a ruling at a later date. The family of footballer Dalian Atkinson reacted with dismay today after a police officer was allowed to keep her job despite her part in the arrest which led to his death. A disciplinary tribunal found Ellie Betley-Smith guilty of unlawful actions for hitting Mr Atkinson 3 times with her police baton as he lay on the ground. 2 years ago, another police officer was jailed for 8 years for Mr Atkinson's manslaughter.
Dalian Atkinson was a star striker for Aston Villa in the 1990s.
And that's a superb individual goal by Dalian Atkinson.
But in 2016, he died after being tasered and kicked in the head by police outside his father's house in Telford. 2 police officers had responded after a 999 call. They arrived to find the former footballer appearing to have a psychotic episode. PC Benjamin Monk was jailed for manslaughter in 2021 over what happened. His colleague, PC Mary Ellen Betley-Smith in the blue dress, was acquitted of actual bodily harm but went on to face a gross misconduct hearing. Today, she kept her job despite being found guilty of gross misconduct for using excessive force. She'd wrongly struck Dalian Atkinson 3 times with her baton as he lay on the ground.
It's just disappointment, the fact that his life to me wasn't as important in what we've gone through the past 6 years, and the fact that they're talking about her being on the rats, but at the end of the day, Dalian's gone.
They are incredibly tragic circumstances, but based on the forensic analysis of all the evidence this week, they've decided that yes, gross misconduct, yes, too much force was used, but it wasn't necessary to fire the officer. Instead, a final written warning was given.
Nearly 7 years after Dalian Atkinson lost his life, his family say they have fought for justice as far as they can and can now begin to grieve. Neil Connery, News at 10.
Tributes were paid today to the Ann Summers founder Jacqueline Gold, who has died at the age of 62 after 7 years treatment for breast cancer. Described by her family as a trailblazer, a visionary and an incredible woman, Ms. Gold transformed the exotic lingerie store into a respected and prosperous fixture on high streets up and down the country. The Royal Mail is potentially in trouble with the industry regulator tonight over claims that its letter delivery services does not match up to legal requirements. It's been referred to Ofcom by a committee of MPs who also raised questions about allegations that technology is being used to track postal workers.
Doing the rounds this morning. Royal Mail is supposed to do this 6 days a week, but MPs say it's failing to meet its obligations to deliver letters.
Well, obviously we weren't getting our mail and we realised that actually there were huge problems.
On this street in Surrey, some residents say the new criticism of postal services is as overdue as their letters.
I had a hospital appointment. The letter arrived 3 days after the appointment, but now it's got to the point where we don't have a service. We don't have the regular service at all. It's when they feel like it.
Have you been given any explanation?
No.
I suspect there are staff shortages. We suspect as well they are prioritising parcel deliveries.
What makes you say that?
Well, certainly when we've had parcel deliveries, there doesn't seem to be any delay.
Today, MPs released this evidence. A poster from one sorting office appears to show parcels prioritised, and this flip chart with letters low on the list. MPs also heard of similar staff briefings.
order.
MPs had questioned the Royal Mail's chief executive.
Do you agree with me that it is a system-wide failure, yes or no?
It's hard for, I'm sorry, Chair, and I can see that you're getting frustrated with it. I'd
like you to answer the question.
I can see you're getting frustrated with it. I do not recognise those briefings.
Royal Mail insists it's strikes that have disrupted its usual policies, and its boss originally told MPs that electronic tracking devices aren't used to discipline staff. But this data used at one delivery office shows who is stopping on delivery, with a warning, don't get caught. MPs say they felt misled. This postman, a rep with the Communication Workers Union, says households are right to worry about their letters.
The reason that people are getting letters late is because we've been told to leave them, to focus on tracts and specials, to take the bulks, which are the oversized parcels, if you have time. The rest of the stuff can sit there.
Royal Mail declined our interview request and says parcels and letters should be treated with equal importance. They reject the suggestion that Royal Mail may have misled MPs. It's part of our shared history, but strikes and financial pressures make Royal Mail's future far less certain, as MPs now seek a full investigation by the industry's watchdog. Chris Choi, News at 10.
Well, pressure continued today on Switzerland's second largest bank, Credit Suisse. A big loan from Switzerland's central bank on Wednesday helped shore up Credit Suisse's shares after a record stock plunge sparks fears of a banking crisis. But the travel banking giant is not out of the woods yet after its shares dropped 8% today. The final day of the Cheltenham Festival saw a convincing win in the Gold Cup.
But it's who's galloping his way to Gold Cup glory.
The favourite Galopin des Champs had the bookies paying out as it powered up the hill to victory. The 7-year-old showed its class, pulling away from challenger Braveman's game to win by 7 lengths. Finally, artificial intelligence is set to take a mobile phone app that helps blind and partially sighted people to the next level. It'll speed up the way the app helps in many of the everyday decision-making processes, which sighted people take for granted.
At the age of 17, Lucy Edwards lost her sight altogether. Now a bit of tech is helping her picture
voice memos
what she can't see.
Open be my eyes. Take picture.
Lucy is one of the first in the world to trial an artificial intelligence-powered app.
What's in the fridge? ?
To not only describe the world around her,
such as eggs, milk, cheese,
but to contextualise it too.
What can I make with these ingredients? ? Virtual volunteer. There are many dishes you could make with those ingredients, such as an omelette, scrambled eggs, or grilled cheese. That's so cool.
The app uses ChatGPT, an AI-powered tool which this week was updated to be able to interpret pictures as well as words.
Based on the picture, it seems like the milk expires on the 21st of December, 2023.
It's really good just to, make sure I know that I'm not going to kill myself or anyone else around us by eating mouldy food.
Does it always get it right?
Yeah, I would say 95% of the time.
What are the models wearing in the photo? The models are wearing various outfits from the Chanel Spring/Summer 2003 ready-to-wear collection.
This app makes me cry. I took a photo of a tube map and it told me where to go. I had not been confident on the tube for 10 years and it's doing that. So I can't wait for what else it can do.
The app's been going for 8 years, but previously relied on human volunteers to advise.
As a blind person, it gives me the autonomy not to have to ask for human sighted assistance anymore, and that is massive. Now my phone and me can be independent without anyone else, and that means more to me than anything.
It's not perfect. For example, it can't tell closely related dog breeds apart, and it will often still offer the option to connect with a real-life human. But its developers say it's learning every day and will soon be released for free worldwide.
Imagine that 253 million people in a very short amount of time have better access to the world through this technology. I think that's the promise.
The dress has a mixture of paisley and floral patterns in various sizes.
A blueprint for progress where we can all see the benefits.
Well, did he get it right? Yeah.
Martin Stew, News at 10.
Extraordinary developments of AI. And that's all from us tonight. Thank you for watching and have a great weekend.